Hey everybody, welcome back to the news. I'm John, there's Josh, Dave is here, and Dr. Mike makes four of us. Let's jump right into things here, guys. The big news, last week, still this week, people talking about this a lot. IKEA, we touched on this last week a little bit. Guys, when we recorded last week, this was kind of in the very, very early days of this story.
And we did say that we hadn't been able to see.
We did say that it was early days, and we published a few days later. Now here we are a week later. We know a lot more than we knew last week. Dr. Mike, where should we start on this continuing controversy?
Well, first we need to talk about what he actually posted. This employee in an internal forum discussing some promotional things that IKEA was doing in regards to LGBT, Pride Month, etc. He wrote something along the lines of, this is like, paraphrasing and translating, that promoting homosexual and deviant behavior is sinful, something along those lines. And then he quoted like two verses from the Bible. And IKEA decided to let him go, saying that, this built an unsafe work environment, that they need to get rid of anything that might, incite violence, et cetera, et cetera. And he's gone to court now. He's got legal defense, and actually some nonprofits are helping him, saying that, this was infringing on his personal beliefs, religious beliefs, freedom of thought, et cetera. And it's gotten interesting as well because the city, not just the city, the employment office have decided to inspect IKEA in regards to if they're up to code when it comes to safety, employment, if all their paperwork is in order.
This sounds like somebody made a phone call.
Joe Bro is throwing his weight around big time about this. He's making political meat out of this. Come on, you go on the company intranet and start posting stuff like that in a Swedish company, you may expect a little bit of trouble, if you ask me. I'm not saying, that everyone has their right to their opinions, if they're religious, etc. But, it seems to me this fella kind of... I guarantee he knew there was going to be trouble.
Sorry, Dr. Mike, do we know, you mentioned these biblical verses, do we know if these verses could maybe be interpreted as kind of threatening gays with physical violence?
They're pretty fire and brimstone.
Well, one of the
they're about stoning people.
It was
to death
the Old Testament line about if two men lay together as if man and woman, then that they will be punished. This is sinful, and they both deserve death. And the other quote was something, I don't remember which verse, but it was the one saying that deviant or sinful behavior is like a weight around a neck, and it should be punishable. Stuff like that. So
IKEA might explain their actions not in the context of promoting a gay rights agenda, but simply stepping into a potentially aggressive and threatening employee situation.
Well, as look, hold on a second. This investigation that's been launched, you outlined the scope of it, John. They're basically rummaging through the entire IKEA operation, and if they start bringing big cases against IKEA, what's to stop IKEA, saying, hang on a second, we're one of the most popular brands in this country, and start
much more popular than you, Mr. Government.
Mr. Showbro.
Right, exactly.
Do you serve people delicious low-price meatballs at the end of every interaction? No, I don't think so.
Case closed.
So I suggest he, wind his neck in, because people in this country love this company. They come back with a warm glow, lots of cheap equipment for their house, and that's what people want in this booming economy.
So where do you see this going? Who has to back down, IKEA or the government?
The guy will probably get another job straight away. In this employment market, it's far from the end of his career or anything. If he feels that way, that strongly.
If he was working in IKEA, where was his career anyway?
Exactly. He'll probably get
Ouch,
a nice.
Dr.
He
Mike,
might even get a nice little settlement. A nice little settlement out of him for an NDA or something.
Is it fair to say, Dr. Mike? Is it fair to say that based on what we know now, again about 8 or 9 days into the controversy? Based on what we know now, it wasn't a situation of IKEA promoting a gay agenda and this guy saying, sorry, I don't agree with this, and getting fired for it. There's a little bit more to it than that.
Every single corporation celebrates LGBT month. It's a fact.
Yeah, but the whole idea is can you force somebody to actually wear a rainbow flag on their shirt if they don't agree with
but that's not the question issue here.
It's like wear your colours if you want to, and half of the office does and half of the office forgets.
Yeah, but it seems like the homosexual aspect to this is kind of distracting. Look, if you go, Dave, let's say at your job, for example, you go to an internal message board, you say, look, I think gay people should be stoned to death. I would
expect to be sacked that
Exactly.
day.
Completely independent of the homosexual aspect to things.
Taking all the abstract civil rights arguments out of it. The guy sounds like, your classic opinionated troublemaker.
Troublemaker, huh?
Winding people up.
I don't think what he said was all that bad. And, if it's a forum discussing the actual issue that they were having, with the LGBT targeted marketing, and he said, like, I don't want to be involved with this, and basically said why.
On his own Facebook page, I probably agree with you, Mike. But because it was the company intranet,
but it was the internal. It's basically discussing. So it's the same thing as if he was around the water cooler, or talking to his boss or manager.
Let's be clear on this. When you join these companies, they sit you down in your induction and they tell you right to your face, do not use speech in these manners and these manners. It couldn't be made
but a company
clearer.
can also not influence your beliefs and your ideology.
That's true. And on the company internet,
if you're working in the company and it's saying, we're going to be promoting this type of ideology or promoting this political party, well, a company is not allowed to do that.
Nobody is forced to participate. But there does be a lot of emails going around saying LGBT month. This is the month. If you want to wear colours to support it, if you want to do this, if you want to do that.
But it wasn't this company saying you can't support it. It was basically saying the company was going to support it itself.
Hey, you two, let me jump in.
You're never compelled to do it.
Wait a second. Do you find it strange that, as far as I know, and tell me if I'm wrong, as far as I know, that none of the parties involved has released a transcript of exactly what was said or written or posted? We're kind of guessing on this. Do we know exactly what the post said?
No, there is a leak saying, and nobody's denied it, of exactly what was said. There's no suggestion that there were other things said earlier before.
The official IKEA statement does not contain the quote, which we did cover last week, and we were skeptical. And I have to admit that, like Mike, I thought the leak looked real or whatever. But I think you have a valid question there, John.
IKEA is a little bit quiet on this whole thing.
Is it all verified? I don't know. But the quotes that I did read, like I say, company intranet. I just think they make these things very clear when you join the company. I just think he was looking for trouble.
Well, we'll see how it turns out. We'll be following
Although
it.
I get the counter argument in the abstract.
Doesn't sound like it's going to be resolved anytime soon, but we'll see. Well, moving on, let's talk about another favorite subject, fraud and crime and real estate and all that, all combined into one story. Dr. Mike, interesting news this week. Police busted a guy who really liked to rent out a particular piece of property.
Yes, one of our fellow Krakowians basically set up a internet service. Well, actually, he used this on like several different internet sites. He put up pictures of like a fabulous seaside apartment. And people could like rent it out for the weekend or for a couple of days. They just had to make sure they put down a down payment. Turns out he didn't have an apartment like that. He wasn't renting anything out. He would just basically wait for the down payment and then change his phone number and email. And originally the police were busting him for conning about 30 people. But when they got to his house, looked through his paperwork, they counted at least 179 people like this. So imagine you're looking for a place for the weekend online, you pay it, and all of a sudden, you lose 100, 200, 300 zlotys. And he did this for almost 200 people within, a matter of 1 year. It's, good extra paycheck.
Do we know what platform they were using?
He was using several. He basically, there are,
Airbnb.
It was Airbnb, but there were also like Polish equivalents, or just websites like, not booking.com, but like that kind of thing where you Google places available to rent out in a given area. And he would just post his photos of that place up there, the Craigslist style rental websites.
I wonder, will this lead to a reimbursement for the affected people through the booking agents?
I mean, he's facing several years in jail for this felony.
Good.
And he might be required to give the money back. Thing is, will he have the money?
White collar crime suffers from being boring because nobody gets shot and you can't make a good drama of it where, the baddie sniffs loads of cocaine and tortures somebody. But let's be honest about it, the money that is stolen every year by operations like this, credit card scams, online investment scams, it's absolutely massive.
It seems to me that for a scam like this, and this is certainly not the first time something like this has been done, but for a scam like this, you don't have to be necessarily clever, just very bold. Yeah. And just kind of daring. And if you can get away with it once or twice, why not try 179 times or whatever it was, right?
Well, that's what they say. There's always a weakness. People can always be manipulated in any organization to give over things. And, you phone someone up.
But don't you have like a similar scam like with... what's it called? Allegro or with eBay or something like that. People selling things they don't really have or who don't ship things that they receive money for. Isn't it the same thing just applied to real estate?
Basically, yeah. It's like you're always afraid when you're ordering online, like, will you get the package inside? It would just be a brick instead of like that new Mac you ordered for like half price.
Is that what happened to you, Mike?
Well, I mean, it's the verified seller thing. That's what I'm interested in. I don't know much details about this story.
like a
but that's the
verified
whole
renter?
idea is you wouldn't buy something unless you could see a long history of reviews. And the reviews tend to be hard to fake, don't they? You know, because each person who reviews has a star rating from how many previous reviews they've written. So it would be very hard to get lots of people you know personally who have really high star ratings from writing reviews to write a load of reviews, if you know what I mean. So how did they do this? That was my main question when you brought this up.
Well, anyway, be careful when you're renting that nice seaside villa for a couple of weeks in August.
I would love to know if he had fake reviews, if he somehow found a way of having a credible back history on the website.
There must be a way somehow.
Probably pretty easy.
Let's move on to something that we talked about last week, and that is the subject of the homeless population in Krakow. There's a growing movement among people in the government, some people in the government, to restrict the ability to assist the homeless in the form of soup kitchens and food and things like this. They say that it's a bad idea, that it attracts the homeless element to certain parts of the city and kind of lowers the overall quality of life. Dr. Mike, what's new in this movement this week?
This guy Łukasz
Wantuch, yeah, he basically was the one who really started this issue and popularized it. And he's actually out of the same like political leanings as Mike Rowski.
He's out of order, is what he is.
But what was going on is the legislation around homeless shelters and all that in Krakow needed to be updated because of some, just basically they had to change some wording, some like housekeeping. And he said like, this is a perfect occasion for us to, throw in a few more regulations when it comes to homeless people.
Changes is the last.
And basically his suggestions were like homeless people, if they want to get free food, they have to either perform some kind of menial task in the city, something I'm guessing like along the lines of like cleaning the streets, picking up trash. And he also said, like, if they want to get the free food, they have to take a bath first.
What?
And another things he was suggesting was moving all the NGOs and charity groups that give out food around the center of town in the Plante, that they cannot give out food there. And there was even talk about him introducing regulations saying like it will be illegal or banned to feed homeless people, like just like pigeons, or you can't feed pigeons technically. But
so he's really going after that cruel asshole vote.
He's got my vote.
What kind of a man is he? For God's sake, take a bath before you can have a free bowl of soup. Jeez.
Well, I don't get. Wait,
I was walking with my wife down Dietla the other weekend, and like they have the tram lines there, but they're gone. But basically, you have that like whole green line, which is really nice.
Yeah,
we're going down there. Every other freaking bench is a couple of homeless guys sleeping there, drinking there. You can't really enjoy that little green area that you have in the center of town because
Dietla's always been a bit shabby, though. Isn't it?
Here's what I don't get about this proposal. And by the way, this is never going to happen. But here's what I don't get about the proposal.
2 minutes away.
You got homeless people over there as well.
True, yeah.
If it's the government giving out the food, okay, I can maybe see where this guy sees a chance for the government to attach conditions.
Yeah, if you want like churches and stuff.
Exactly. If you want government food, you have to take a shower. You have to whatever. But how does he insert himself into the activities of third parties, charities, churches, whatever? How does he say you cannot collect resources and give it to them unless you do this?
There's a lot of this moronic virtue signaling on both sides of Polish politics. Quite frankly, it makes me.
But
sick.
I'll be honest. It's like you have laws saying that you can't run around naked or scream your lungs off in public. For obscenity, for public distraction, etc. But
typical Saturday night.
But let's think about the fact, like, the olfactory sensations. You should be moved along as well if you are stinking up the place.
Which they are. Look, the Polish police do their absolute best with this situation. They're all over it, really. I mean, look, it's a what can you do problem, really. I mean, they're going to take priority, I hope, always with people who are drunk and totally wasted to the point where they might do someone an injury,
harassing people,
or hurt
something
themselves.
Like that.
They should be put somewhere, in a secure environment until they sober up. And what else can you do with them, really? Come on.
Be curious to know the legal situation of this.
You have to have like
what
policy where it's there's some kindness as well. Like, for God's sake,
but still, if you're a danger to yourself or to other people,
sure,
okay, that's one thing. But if you're just is it a crime to be homeless?
Is it a crime to smell?
Is it a crime to sleep on a park bench? I don't know.
Oh, why should it be?
I would say it should be because it's not a sleeping location.
Nobody else is using it. Do you ever want to sleep on a park bench, Mike? Do you ever walk along
I don't want to sit on a
sleeping
park bench because there's a bum sleeping on it. I mean,
he's taking your place, huh?
Otherwise, Mike could be all over that whole sleeping in the park fucking situation.
Hey, do you guys remember back when the old train station was still active before it kind of moved underground to the new place? Remember walking in there in the winter and the wall of stench that would hit you in the face? Remember that?
Generations of piss.
think.
It was shocking.
But you know what's happening right now? It's like now when you go to Mediamarkt at Galeria Krakowska next to the train station, if there's any like football match or anything going on, especially when it's colder, you go to the end of the store where they have all the TVs, and you get a bunch of homeless people watching it. You're like walking through the store, and all of a sudden that smell just slaps you in the face. Like, you know what? I don't feel like buying that 4K TV this weekend. Maybe I'll just order it online.
Okay, Dr. Mike, wait. If you're not sympathetic,
that's saying no. Polish in-store security.
if you're not sympathetic to these efforts to organize, resources for the homeless, what are we supposed to do with them? They're not going to just disappear. What are we supposed to do, and how are we supposed to take care of people who are, vulnerable people in the society? Isn't that a kind of a measure of how good we are as a society? How we take care of people like that?
And we should, there should be organizations that help, train these people for employment, to give them assistance. But I do agree with Vantuk saying there should be also conditions. You can stay here the night, but you can't be drunk. You have to look after your personal hygiene as well.
They probably wouldn't be homeless if they could do all that. Like, I mean, come on, it's just like it's a nice thought, but like it's never going to happen. So it's a ridiculous.
The only problem is like if you make conditions, to be brutal.
How's he going to police this? Like, he's going to actually turn people away from soup kitchens. Now you're just a little bit too smelly. What's the smellometer got to read?
That's the problem. Like they actually,
how do you regulate it? It's ridiculous.
They actually, I think they introduced this in
like John says, these aren't government programs. These are privately run church.
Or these are NGOs that often receive money from the government as well.
Yeah.
But we're like, I know in the Czech Republic they actually introduced, I think it was in Prague, laws talking about like smelling too bad, and they had problems because they actually had police officers walk around the trains smelling out people who was a little too offensive in the olfactory sense. But what's the bar there? How do you define that legally? And that's the main problem. But it's kind of like that Supreme Court judge who said about porn, "I know it when I see it." It's the same thing. When you're there, you could say like, "No, this is a little bit more than just a guy who's sweaty."
Dr. Mike, another question for you. We touched on this last week because the subject is kind of inspired by what happens in Warsaw. Because in Warsaw there have long been these volunteer groups that put together like a mobile soup kitchen, and they set up shop right in front of the Palace of Culture, right in the center of town. And I see them on Facebook, and they're helping lots of people. What's your take on organizations like that? Good because they're helping people, or bad because they're drawing the homeless element right into the center of town?
Where they are anyway.
I have extreme experience. I want to help people, but I don't want the help to be just giving out food. It has to be some type of help with the goal of getting these people out of homelessness. But also, there's one thing I want to mention about this. Łukasz Vantuk here in Krakow. Everybody said like, no, we're not introducing your changes to the ordinance to legislation. And he said, okay, fine. Next week, there will be actually a city council meeting, dedicated to the discussion of homelessness. And he said he's going to bring in 50 homeless people to this discussion, pay for their food, for their drink, and let them sit down next to them just to see how the how the council members will end. And people react. And some people are saying like, oh, this is such a social media publicist kind of movement. He's being extremely cynical. But I think it could be quite interesting to see what happens.
You support them, but from a safe distance.
He provokes a reaction and then tries to get a picture moment out of it. Sounds like he's trying to build his profile.
Speaking of reaction, let's get a sign of life from Josh over there. He's really quiet today. Josh, why don't you check in with a comment on the homeless situation?
Yeah, it's shocking, I think.
Homelessness bad.
Well, there's not really much I can add. I'm kind of with Mike on the whole sort of, when they smell bad, they really smell bad, and I'd rather they didn't.
Are we cruel or mean for pointing this out and not wanting to be around them, and maybe putting conditions on the help that we give them?
No, I don't think so. No? I mean, you avoid people who are offensive for other reasons apart from their smell, so why shouldn't you?
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, moving on to something else. We talk about a lot on this show. We touch on lots of subjects. And one of the subjects we've touched on quite a bit, I think on 3 or 4 different episodes, in fact, some of our most listened to episodes, about strip clubs in Krakow and how people get taken advantage of and kind of, criminally ripped off, and lots of money stolen from their credit cards. And one of the elements in those stories has been the suspicion that people are drugged in these clubs, and that's something that kind of facilitates their being robbed. And just this week, guys, we had an indication that there is some element of truth to this. There's a reason to believe that these date rape drugs, or what's the other name for it, Dave? GHB is a thing in Krakow clubs. Tell us about what happened this week.
A lady was drugged in a club and she, blacked out. She woke up outside her house. Thankfully, she was okay. But she tried to report it to the police. But, the usual stuff, by the time they were even taking her seriously, it was too late because it clears your system so quickly. Mike, give us a little scientific breakdown of what exactly GHD is. Use your old PhD.
GHD or GHB?
GHB.
We're talking about what's it called? Gamma hydroxybutyric acid.
Such a doctor.
It's actually a naturally occurring substance.
Really?
It's a neurotransmitter. It's in our brain to a certain extent. You can get it in citrus fruit, or even in some alcoholic beverages. It's there in a small amount. That's not actually pharmacologically significant, but the synthesized form, it can be in a powder or in a liquid, and it's used for anesthesia, but it can also use to drug people in like a recreational sense. So people take it to get high because it makes you kind of disconnect from the world. But the right dose given to somebody who doesn't know about it can also cause them to, first of all, it makes you become even more drunk than you are if it's in alcohol. You slur your speech, you have trouble concentrating, your inhibitions are completely gone, it's easy to manipulate you. So, this is why it's used as a date rape drug. But an extra little thing that we need to realize, it also causes something called retrograde amnesia in a lot of cases. So somebody takes this, they get wonky, they don't really know what's going on, they're used, they're abused, and then they don't remember what happened the night before or those couple of hours before. So it's really hard then to pin the, you didn't even know what club you were in, what you drank, let alone who you met.
I'm going to put you on the spot now, Mikey. Why does it clear your system so quickly? 4 to 6 hours, this drug is completely undetectable. How is that possible?
It doesn't have too many metabolites. It does its thing in the brain, and it's cleared out very quickly. It doesn't break down in the liver to it's broken down in the liver, but it doesn't have many other substances that are more difficult to break down, like with alcohol. It literally does what it does, and it's out the system, out the kidneys within 4 to 6 hours.
Which is why it's such a hard thing to prove that someone's been given it. And, I think we have to take into account that we're never going to get a positive test from one of these nightclub cases. It's going to be really difficult to ever do that because of that. By the time a person even realises, that you should go and have that test, he'll never get it anyway. But even if he did realise in time, he'd have probably fallen asleep in the meantime.
And it's not an over-the-counter test. You need to actually go to the hospital for them to test this. And, usually when you're drunk and out of it, you're not going to think oh, I think I'm about to be raped. Maybe I'll go to the ER.
But here's what we do know, right? We know that our friend Robert Socha looked through, hundreds of case files.
Investigative journalist.
Yeah, around the country, and found that in some, in a massive proportion of these cases, this was the testimony of the person that they were definitely drugged. And you read some of this stuff as well, and it's like experienced guys have been drinking their whole lives, and they know they had 2-3 beers and maybe a shot when they got there. And they know what they're capable of drinking, 3-4 times that before they'd be anywhere near totally drunk, So I believe all those people, and I know that's not scientifically proven, but it's the weight of evidence as well if you look at it realistically.
Does this stuff come in the form of a powder?
It can be in several forms. It can be in the form of a salt, like when it's connected to sodium or potassium. And then it can be just like a powder. And it's the stuff that you hold between your fingers. That's more than enough. It's also in the form of a liquid. It's flavorless. It's odorless. So, a little bit this out to your drink. You don't even notice it's there.
But so do we know, the bad guys who are using this, maybe a dumb question, where are they getting it? Is there some kind of dark web, black market stuff for this?
Sources where you get amphetamines and other street drugs and design drugs. Because a lot of people use it as a recreational drug. You take a little bit and you feel like you're really drunk.
So is this one case enough?
Been everywhere since you used to hear about this in the 90s all the time. That's where the term date rape came from. Unfortunately, it is that effective. This drug. It's a menace.
And I remember this was actually a deal in Poland about 12, 15 years ago. That's when it first popped up in here in Krakow. I think somebody must have just started selling it here because there were stories every weekend of this happening. And they started selling those little caps that you could put over your drink.
Is there any reason to believe it's a bigger issue here than it is anywhere else?
Well, no, I don't know about that because let's do just the only relation we have to the story is because we've talked to so many people who've been robbed in these strip clubs.
Right.
So I wouldn't like to broaden it out that far. I don't know.
Dr. Mike?
People watch your drinks when you're out there, be with friends, and
it's easy to get. It's cheap. People do use it. Predators, traffickers. It's well known in when they're running people across borders and stuff that they use this to kind of drug them up and stick them under the floorboards or whatever.
Well, speaking of not being in complete control of yourself and being a little bit, let's say relaxed, just last week, we had somebody caught facing criminal charges for being too relaxed. But the problem was that this guy was in charge of a boat with lots of people on the boat. Guys, tell us about what happened to this rather relaxed boat captain.
Well, I don't know. I haven't read the story, but I'm judging from your introduction, it sounds to me like a captain of a boat who was...
Yeah, okay, well, let's go to somebody who does know us.
Oh, basically, this weekend we had one of those tourist boats that...
Good improvising, though, Josh. I like it.
that go around...
Are you eating a mint?
It's a Paul's lozenge. I've got a sore throat.
Josh is not himself today.
Explains your relative lack of interest in us today.
Yeah, just shut up and press the buttons there.
Dr. Mike, was this is one of those touristy boats? Or what?
It was a touristy boat, going around Wawel, the old part of town. I believe they had 8 passengers on there, but somebody noticed, or the police were actually called in, the water police were called in because somebody noticed that, he was boating in a peculiar manner. I don't know, when you're driving drunk, you swerve.
Peculiar.
He didn't signal when he changed lanes.
Yes. So the police pulled him over and, right
Pulled
away.
him over. Pull over now. I'm in a boat.
And he was swimming as well, wasn't he? He sounds like a bit of crack in fairness, though.
And it turned out that he had somewhere along the lines of 2.8 promils.
3, I heard, yeah.
Yeah, so that's almost 0.3 there. That's
Impressive.
That's good.
What's legally drunk in Poland again? Do we know?
Well, legally drunk.
3, is it?
0.5 or 0.3. 0.03.
So he's like 6 times?
Yeah, he's getting close to levels that can kill people. And
Not real men, though. They go for the swim. Tourists be damn. Wait there, lads. I'll be back in a second.
So this guy is in his 40s. Apparently, he's going to lose his license. He can't operate tours. He can't operate a motorized boat.
He'll be working off the books next week. Don't worry about
The
it.
story I read described him as a 42-year-old helmsman.
Helmsman. That's one way to put it. Yeah, exactly.
Purple helmsman.
Well, be careful and pay attention to your captain next time you jump on one of those boats. 0.3. I mean, that's just completely
drinking Captain
wasted.
Morgan there.
Captain Morgan. One more story here we want to cover. Just breaking yesterday as we record this. This is just bizarre, unfortunate, and bad in so many ways. A ring of Poles who may or may not be Roma. This is another part of a side controversy to the main controversy. Convicted this week in England, I think in Birmingham, for running basically a slavery ring, essentially. They were getting people from Poland, including newly released prisoners, homeless people, other kind of marginal people in society, getting them to come to England, forcing them to go to work, signing up for welfare benefits in their name and taking the benefits, just exploiting them in so many ways. And it's all come out this week after the convictions, guys.
Well, the story was in the media for quite a while, but the convictions and the sentences came down finally, and it was a great piece of investigative work by the British police. They wrapped it up nice, 3 to 11 years for all of them, but absolutely shocking tale of countrymen exploiting countrymen.
I mean, this is like a little anecdote going around in Poland generally, is never trust Poles outside of Poland when they're offering you help or something like that. This is when sad but true. But in this scenario, it's just horrible what they're doing. The worst thing is they were bringing people and it would initially make it look like it was all legit. They would help them take them to the
yes, they had
offices.
This presentable looking lady who was the kind of front of the operation, getting them, and of course they were claiming benefits in their name, everything, helping them through the process, and then bringing them back to their
£2 million
cage.
altogether, apparently.
You would fly.
And they had a kind of like a Stockholm Syndrome setting in with a lot of the people that were working for them.
Really?
They were kind of like locked up in little caravans and beaten and stuff like that. But they still kind of very reluctant to testify or to even to want to change their situation.
I think they chose their targets, very specifically.
Yeah, vulnerable people. Yeah.
Bring it in.
Have we established that they were Roma, and does it matter?
No and no.
I'm asking because I was looking at the comments on the story just this morning on Gazeta Wyborcza, and all the top-rated comments were saying, well, these were Roma. It's not really us. It's not really Poles. It's Roma, which opens up a whole another can of worms.
It's the Hungarian excuse, isn't it?
I can tell you something. If it was the same situation with, say, Irish travellers abroad, there'd be a lot of people down the pub kind of trying to similarly disown such behaviour.
So too, yeah.
But we don't know if they were Roma. So all the names just look Polish to me when I saw them, and they were all published. I don't know the difference between a Roma Polish name and a Polish name. And so I've nothing really to add to you there, Joe.
One weird question. I saw this repeated in several different stories on the subject. They said that
they made £2 million.
£2 million. They said that some of the workers were paid as little as 50 pence a day.
Wow.
Now, I don't understand, even if you have, maybe some mental problems, even if you're not especially bright, why do you go to work for 50 pence a day? How does
That's
that
why
work?
they were so. There was an element. I seen a kind of documentary about this, and they interviewed some of the victims, and they're saying like, you know, you get the shame of being trapped so stupidly. They didn't want to admit it to the people back in Poland, and you know, you can't overestimate how much an intimidating, controlling person can put another person in a box like that. I know what you're thinking. I'd never accept that. I'd never do that.
I just walk away.
Exactly, right. But, you know, and a lot of them did. That's how they ended up getting convicted, you know.
But there is a strong psychological aspect to this.
You know, you can't put barriers up. That's why it was called slavery. Like, they had extreme precautions to stop them running. Like, you know, it's
And like you might not understand how this happens, but just realize like all those spamming emails you get, like, oh, who the hell would fall for this? This is so stupid. But you know, when they're hitting thousands of people, they just need, you know, a few people, a few percentage points to like hit back. So it's the same situation like this. They're looking for the right kind of people that will fall into this. And it's only people that are, you know, unfortunately vulnerable or something else that get sucked in, and they just avoid everybody else.
Those who believe the word gullible isn't actually in the English dictionary.
They say it was up to 450 people were trafficked that way, to varying degrees. I think the people who ended up in trial were the ones that were managed to keep a hold of for years, like, you know, and some people would have escaped.
This is red meat, Dave. This is red meat for the people in England and elsewhere who say that this is what the EU brings. You know, we get open borders, we get crime and criminals. We're importing the dregs from other societies. Is that just kind of, you know, shamelessly exploiting it for their own political purposes, or do they have a point?
It's a horrific story, but I don't know if I tie it into all that. Like, you know, I mean...
you can understand why people would do it, but I mean, I suppose, you know, the simple fact is, with no further judgment, that if you're trying to operate some kind of criminal operation and there is an opportunity in a country where there's some kind of benefit scam that you can do, then, you know, if you can do it, then you do. I mean, regardless of the rights or wrongs of benefits or free movement of people or whatever.
Yeah, I guess you're right, Dave. I mean, there is a psychological aspect to this. I mean, it's kind of similar to the situation with people who are trafficked for sexual exploitation. You always wonder why not just, you know, get out? How can they tolerate this? But either through physical intimidation, psychological manipulation. You know, the human psychology is a complicated and fragile, delicate thing. I guess there are ways.
They shamed them into thinking they were complicit.
Yeah, there are ways to control these people, I suppose.
Yeah, of course.
So it's kind of hard to understand from the outside, but.
It's not a very fun story to end on, I have to say.
Not at all.
Slavery on the KrakCast.
Yeah, we've not touched on slavery before. Well, let's finish on something else, guys. Our name is up in space.
The Krak-Sat.
The Krak-Sat.
Hey.
The Krak-Sat.
What is it? A fluidic ferrofluid or something?
A magnetic ferrofluid, new project designed by some students here in Krakow who want to use this to help satellites navigate and maneuver in space.
And it's up in space and everything now, isn't it?
Podcasters to the stars.
We mentioned this a couple of months back, but actually was being launched to the ISS, International Space Station. But only a couple of days ago, they actually released it into orbit. It's going to be flying around for the next year. It was also released together with Poland's first commercial satellite out of Poznań. I think it's called Skyrevolt or something like that. This satellite...
Good name, Skyrevolt.
They will actually...
It's like a Bond movie.
Use this commercial satellite to monitor smog and pollution and water levels around the world.
Nice. Probably aren't there always like television signals as well? Isn't that kind of the main purpose for these satellites?
Well, those are the ones that...
Jamming over his cable.
I just want to watch TV.
Well, you know, these satellites are being launched in low Earth orbit around the ISS, so it's, you know, 100, 200 kilometers, while your communication satellites, your TV satellites, they're like 30, 40,000 kilometers.
Not geostationary, then.
It's more a proof of concept for this new steering system that will be revolutionary, cheaper, much easier to manufacture. It could be a huge win for the aerospace industry in Poland if this goes well.
Krak-Sat. Let's hope that's the beginning of a trend on naming different things here.
Krak-Sat.
Yeah,
Crack
nice.
everything.
We like it. Well, we're going to bring things to a close, guys. That's everything you need to know for this week. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the KrakCast.
And look up and wave at the Krak-Sat.